in academia and PROs. I put the parenthesis here not because it was kind of a registered trademark, because in the Italian Code of Industrial Property they talk about public research organizations and public organizations. There might be some organizations that don't have as a main mission doing research, but still you might have some inventions over there. So in the code they also mention public organizations. So this might be of interest for those that are working in academia, because I think you should probably, you should have a grasp of what happens if you come up with an idea that it can be with an invention, that can be patented, and also if you work in a research organization, but also if you work for a company, you're interested in dealing with a university or a research organization because you want to maybe create a new product or have a better product or service. So I'm going to talk about Italy because that is my country of origin, so it's the one that probably I know the most. I worked also as a technology licensing officer for a university in a previous life, 7 years ago, the University of Trieste, which is close to Slovenia, very lovely place, with a lot of interest for physics and nanotechnology, so very interesting technologies coming out of the university. So I just wanted to mention this sentence, quote this sentence from the Director General of WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, that said that universities are the factories of the knowledge economy, and that is true. So you will see that mostly in every university on the planet there is an IP policy that is telling you how things work internally, and if there is not, they will probably have it very soon, because this is now very common. If they don't have a policy, probably it's because it's a clause or it's an attachment to the agreement that you're going, the employment agreement that you're going to sign when you become a researcher or a professor. So what happens if, and this is something that might be related more to people that are working as researchers. So what happens if I come up with an invention, and as a company, how can I get the best benefit out of what is being done in these organizations? So in Italy is one of the very few countries on the planet in which we have the so-called professor's regime. So the researcher is the owner of the idea, which is kind of weird, because for two reasons. One, because the researcher usually wants to do research and wants to be a researcher, so it doesn't want to be an entrepreneur. Sometimes it happens, and also successfully, but usually they just want to do research. So giving this extra burden to make you the owner of the invention actually sometimes can create problems. And also because as the owner of the invention, probably you don't have the money to pursue the industrialization of the idea, the patenting, and all these kind of things. So what happens actually in practice is that you, as a researcher, come up with an idea, then you have to notify your office in the university that is called usually Technology Transfer Office or Industrial Liaison Office or any other kind of offices that has to do with technology transfer, and then the people in this office will tell you if the idea patented and if the university has an interest in getting the patent. At that point, you as a researcher basically will assign, so you will transfer the rights to file the patent application, and the university will become the owner. In exchange of this transfer, the researcher will get in return potential royalties or a portion of the sales price if the technology is actually sold to someone. So there are some general rules in the Code of Industrial Property in Italy, Article 64 that regards all kinds of employees in a company, and Article 65 that regards the researchers in universities and public research organizations, and more generally public organizations. So I just kind of highlighted in bold the most important things. Basically it says don't look at Article 64, this is for other reasons, but when you are an employee of any university or in a public research organization, of course that has research purposes, or actually even not in some cases, the researcher is the exclusive owner of the rights that are deriving from this invention. If there are more inventors that belong to different entities, the principle is that they all own equally a portion of this pie, unless, of course, something else is agreed among the parties. And the inventor, as I told you, has the right to file the patent application, which is the first right that basically is attached to an invention. So you have the right to file for a patent application, but then the researcher usually assigns this right to the university, to the entity they belong to. And you have to notify. The interesting thing is that the code says you have to notify the employer, so the university, but they don't say anything about the case in which you don't do it. So in some cases, actually, some researchers do not notify, and since they are the exclusive owners, they file for a patent, and sometimes they also commercialize the technology. It can happen. Moving forward, the code says, as a university or a public organization, so you see here they changed the term, so it's a public organization now, so it can be also a Ministry of Agriculture, for example, that has a small section or a small lab, and you might have someone that is the inventor. They can, as part of their autonomy, they can establish the maximum amount of their royalty. So we have basically two layers of regulation, and the universities and research organizations are free to determine these percentages in case of licensing or in case of sales. But in any case, the inventor shall be always entitled to not less than 50% of the proceeds related to the assignment of the invention or the royalties. So to give you a very simple case, I have a technology, it's being patented, I sell it to a pharma company for $1 million, the researcher will get $500,000. Usually in the contract that you have with the university you belong to, they always say net sales or net proceeds from royalties. Of course, there are expenses that are deducted, but basically you get 50%, which is a lot. I mean, if you compare it to other IP policies around the world, 50% is really good. The bad thing for Italian researchers is that the market of technology transfer for universities is not doing that good. So 46, 47 universities that have been surveyed a couple of years ago reported a little bit more than €1 million in licensing proceeds in royalties, which is not that much if you think that US universities, I think in the last survey, reported 2.6 or 2.7 billion dollars. So it's a very, very big difference. Any case, if there is a regulation by the entity, anyway, the entity, they cannot get less than they will get 30%. So basically, they can go up to 70%. So there are some entities that are recognizing more than 50% to the inventor. This is interesting. It's kind of a so-called compulsory licensing. So if 5 years after the grant of the patent, the inventor is not using the invention, or he didn't assign it, or he didn't license it, basically the entity has the right to basically license it, or use it, or make it, or import it into the country. So it's a free, non-exclusive right to exploit the invention or to sub-license it. And then finally, the last paragraph of this article said that, and this is a very big exception, that is very interesting, of course, for companies that might be interested in dealing with a university in Italy. It says all these things that we said, they don't apply if there is an agreement with a private entity. So if you're a pharma company from Japan and you want to deal with the University of Milan or University of Turin, basically you will fall within this category. So paragraph 5. So you can write an agreement that says that proceeds are shared in a different way, or that maybe marketing activities are shared, or patenting activities are shared between the two parties. So it's a very big exception. So one is the first layer that you have to know is the code that applies to everyone, and the second layer is the employer internal policy. And why you should have to know about these things, for two reasons. One, as a company or an employee, you should look for it, because if you are working for a university or a research organization, you want to know what happens if you come up with the next billion-dollar idea. It makes sense. So you have to take a look at these kind of things. And where you can find them. Usually, nowadays, they're on the website of the institution. You can find the IP policy. They can be containing aggregators of IP data, which is like this one. This is from WIPO, the website of the World Intellectual Property Organization. They have a database with IP policies of entities around the world. So here I search for Italy. They're not showing all the Italian universities. There are a little bit more than 50. There are 17, but still better than nothing. So they're in Italian, and some of them are also in English. So as a company, they can you can basically check before dealing with the university what is the IP policy. And then, of course, you can get in touch directly with the tech transfer office, or you can check the employment contracts. And the best advice, if you're a company and you want to get in touch with these universities, of course, is to talk to these collaborative or cooperative research offices or tech transfer offices. And of course, you have to be very careful when you disclose your ideas. Hopefully, you will have an NDA in place or a confidentiality clause inside any other kind of agreement. I think I'm kind of running late, and we have the people on Skype that are kind of waiting. But basically, just to sum up, if you are a researcher, you always have to look for this internal regulation, because you have to know what happens to you if you come up with something. And this is also not just true for a university or research center, but also, of course, if you work for a company. And you always have to be very careful before sending out samples of things or compounds or materials that can be biological materials, or even research results to other parties, because you might get yourself in trouble, because maybe you cannot get the patent because the idea is no longer new, or because you sent out something that you were not supposed to. So always be in touch with the tech transfer office before doing these kind of things. If you're a company, of course, it's very, very useful and recommended that you check these IP policies and you get in touch with the relevant office inside the university to see how they manage the IP rights internally. And with this, I'm done. This is just a small picture of Italy. Of course, if you want to have more information, I can give you more.